The silence of Blackwood Manor was a living thing. It seeped from the cold stone, clung to the velvet curtains, and pooled in the hollows of its grand empty halls. At the center of this silence was Lord Alistair, the Duke's eldest son and heir, a beautiful, broken thing. They called him deaf. A childhood fever had stolen his hearing at the age of 6, they said, and with it his voice. For 20 years he had been a ghost in his own home, communicating with curt nods, sharp gestures, and the deep, unnerving stillness in his gray eyes. Elara was new to the manor, a housemaid with nimble fingers and a gaze that missed nothing. Unlike the other servants who moved around Lord Alistair with loud, exaggerated pity, Elara was quiet. She watched him. She saw how his eyes would follow the path of a fly buzzing near the window, how his posture would stiffen moments before a door slammed shut on the far side of the house. The world called him deaf, but Elara felt a terrible, thrilling suspicion growing in her heart. Lord Alistair could hear everything. The question was, why was he pretending he couldn't? The Duke of Blackwood treated his son like a regrettable piece of furniture to be polished and maintained, but never truly engaged with. The younger son, Gideon, was the golden heir, loud, charming, and poised to manage the estate's affairs. Alistair was simply there, a silent testament to a past tragedy. Elara's duties often took her to the library, Alistair's sanctuary. She would dust the towering shelves while he sat at a great oak desk, lost in a book. The other maids chattered and clattered as they worked, confident he was in his own soundless world. Poor boy, they'd sigh, not even bothering to lower their voices. Such a handsome face, but an empty vessel. One blustery afternoon, Elara was polishing a silver candelabra near the fireplace. The wind howled, rattling the window panes. Suddenly, a heavy log in the grate shifted, then split with a deafening crack and a shower of sparks. Elara flinched. The other maid in the room, Mary, didn't even look up from her dusting. But Alistair, his shoulders went ramrod straight. His knuckles, resting on the open page of his book, turned white. It was a flicker of a reaction, gone as quickly as it came, but Elara saw it. It was the involuntary terror of a sudden, unexpected noise. It wasn't the reaction of a man who felt a vibration. It was the reaction of a man who heard. The suspicion took root and began to grow. Elara started to orchestrate small, silent tests. While clearing his luncheon tray, she'd let a spoon slip from her fingers onto the stone floor behind his chair. She saw the minute tensing of his neck muscles. When she walked into a room, she would deliberately scuff her shoe on a loose floorboard she had discovered, and his eyes, though fixed on the horizon outside, would lose their focus for a barest second. He was aware. He was always aware. The suspense of it was a knot in her stomach. If she was right, this man was living a 20-year lie. But why? What secret was so profound he would sacrifice his own voice, his own place in the world, to keep it? If she was wrong, she was a fool, a girl seeing ghosts where there were none. Accusing the family of being mistaken about their own son's affliction would mean instant dismissal and ruin. Her moment of truth came with a discovery in the manor's disused attic. Tucked away in a dusty trunk was a small bird-shaped music box, its silver tarnished with age. A small plaque on the bottom read, "For my little songbird Alistair. Love, Mother." The late Duchess. Elara knew the stories. The Duchess had died of a sudden malady just weeks after Alistair's supposed fever. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was her chance and her greatest risk. That evening, she found Alistair in the library, staring into the fire, a lonely silhouette against the flickering light. The room was empty. The Duke and Gideon were out. Taking a steadying breath, Elara moved to a shadowed alcove behind his high-backed chair, completely out of his line of sight. Her fingers trembled as she wound the tiny key on the music box. She released the latch. A delicate tinkling melody filled the silence. It was a simple lullaby, fragile as spun glass. Alistair went rigid. He didn't turn, he didn't move a muscle. But as the melody played on, a single crystalline tear traced a path down his stone-still face, shimmering in the firelight. The music box wound down, and the silence that rushed back in was heavier than before. Elara stepped out from the shadows, her own tears threatening to fall. She didn't shout his name. She didn't touch him. She walked to stand before him and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to pretend anymore, my lord," she said softly. His gaze lifted from the fire to her face. For the first time, she didn't see a ghost. She saw a man trapped in a prison of his own making, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and shattering relief. He opened his mouth, and a sound emerged, not a word, but a dry, rasping breath, like a lock being forced after decades of rust. He tried again. She sang that. The night she died, he finally croaked, his voice a ghost of what it might have been. My fever broke. I could hear again. I heard her fall in the hall outside my door. I heard my father, I heard him weeping. He shouted that the fever should have taken me instead. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. A secret was out, a poison drawn from a festering wound. As a 6-year-old boy, racked with guilt and terror, Alistair had made a choice. To protect himself from a world that had become too painful to hear, and from a father who blamed him for his mother's death, he retreated into a fortress of silence. And everyone had believed him. 2 weeks later, the Duke was holding court at the dinner table, boasting of a new business venture while Gideon hung on his every word. As usual, Alistair was ignored. It will secure the Blackwood name for a generation, the Duke boomed. A pity my eldest cannot appreciate the gravity of it. A legacy requires a voice to carry it. A fork clattered onto a plate. The Duke and Gideon turned to stare. Alistair had placed his silverware down. He looked directly at his father, his gray eyes clear and steady. On the contrary, father, he said, his voice stronger now, honed by hours of quiet practice with Elara. I find the venture's reliance on the Northumbrian trade route to be its primary weakness. A foolish risk. The silence that fell upon the room was more profound than any that had come before. The Duke's jaw hung open. Gideon's face was a mask of disbelief. The servants lining the walls froze in place. Lord Alistair, the deaf heir, had spoken. He turned his head slightly, and his eyes found Elara standing by the door. He gave her the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It was a shared secret, a revolution begun by a dropped spoon and a whispered melody. They had all been wrong. They had shouted at him for 20 years, assuming he couldn't hear. But it was the maid, the one no one ever bothered to listen to, who had finally proven that all he ever needed was someone to speak to him.